part of Texas. Now, the Germans were very nice to the British. When the war began, the British cut all the cables between Europe and America, but they left one cable intact. That's the one that went from Germany to New York through London, because they gave some reason that American personnel in Germany would need to use it. Why did they leave it intact? Because they were tapping it, and they were reading all the German diplomatic minute notes. Germans thought they had an unbreakable code, but not. When this news is released, Wilson blows the stack, and America is going to come into the war. So April 6th, America declares war, mobilizes, sends troops to France under Blackjack Pershing, one of the senior generals in the army. Why does Pershing have the name Blackjack? Because he commanded 2 regiments of African-American troops in the West. Pershing was born in 1860, and he's essentially an Indian fighter. All right, May, the French army is exhausted. The French army is on the verge of mutiny. In fact, several units of the French army do mutiny. Now, unlike the Russians, they don't turn their rifles on their officers. They simply refuse to go back. They fought enough. They want their officers to know, they want the French government to know that they're citizens, will fight to defend France, but they're not going to attack and throw their lives away uselessly. The Germans do not know about this, and they do not take any offensive operations during this period of time. In March, the government of Nicholas II collapses, and you have a new government come in under Alexander Kerensky. There's a great debate whether or not they should continue the war. Kerensky says we're going to continue the war, and they will launch an offensive in July. The Germans will break up the offensive, and the Russian army will continue to will just disintegrate, absolutely disintegrate. So things are looking pretty good for the Germans. They've got Russia out of the war, and they've managed to get a guy by the name of Lenin into Russia. The French army is on the verge of mutiny, and things are looking pretty good. November 7th through 16th, the Bolshevik Revolution. The Bolsheviks come into power. Lenin says, no more war, peace, land, and bread. We're out of this war. So Lenin comes back and he takes Russia out of the war. They begin negotiating a separate peace. January 1918, President Wilson issues his peace plan known as the 14 Points. Now he does this without consultation with the British and the French. Americans like to do this. Such things as the restoration of Belgium, free and open borders between nations, settlement of all territorial disputes. So there are things here that the French like, there are things here that the Germans like, but there are things there that both hate. But he announces this, and no negotiations. This is the peace plan. March, the Germans and the Russians signed a treaty of Brest-Litovsk. This is a very harsh treaty, and for those who criticize Treaty of Versailles is nothing like the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The Germans take Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Finland is recognized an independent state. Essentially, the Germans take 250,000 square miles of Russian territory, which wasn't a very smart thing to do, because one thing Germany is short of is troops. Germany doesn't have the divisions needed to assault in the West at this period of time. And when you take all this territory, you have to occupy it. So that means a large portion of the German army is going to be tied down in the East. And this also makes the British and French even more determined to continue. Now, very briefly, this is the first war that's fought in the air. The airplane, first flies in 1903 with the Wright brothers. By 1914, aviation, progress in aviation has passed the Europe among the French and the Germans. They're flying very rickety planes. They weren't quite sure what to do with them. They were originally used as scouts, and a French plane and British plane in 1914 saw the turn in the German army in front of Paris, which led to the Battle of the Marne. But as these guys are flying past each other, some guy gets an idea, we'll fly over the enemy trenches, we'll throw out a few grenades, so they do that. And then the next day they're up flying and someone is throwing out grenades, and the next plane comes by with a pistol. So they start shooting at the opposite plane with a pistol. Then the next day, somebody goes up and says, okay, you got a pistol, I got a shotgun. And they start shooting with a shotgun. And before you know, they're all mounting machine guns. Now, one of the problems was they didn't know where to put the machine gun. At first, they put the machine gun in the front of the plane so the pilot could aim, but this had the unfortunate consequence of shooting off the propeller. They tried various ways to correct this. They put blades on the propeller to deflect the bullets, but the Germans and the Dutch come up with something called an interrupter gear, which they would fire through the propellers. So air warfare is going to develop very rapidly. By 1916, you have fighter planes, which are fighting for dominance in the air, strafing trenches and dropping bombs. By 1917, you're going to have the development of bombers. The Germans will bomb London in 1915, but they will use Zeppelins. But by 1917, 1918, both sides had bombers. All right, the last great German offensive of the war comes in March and July of 1918. This is Ludendorff's idea. Ludendorff now has a numerical superiority in the West. The Americans have not been fully deployed, and he strikes. And in a period of 4 months, he pushes the Americans and the French back. He gets to within 40 miles of Paris. He alarms the French so much that the French government leaves the city of Paris. But the offensives are not really coordinated. Ludendorff simply runs out of Maine. He doesn't have the resources really to continue the war. August 8th is der Schwarze Tag, the Black Day. The German army is taking heavy losses, and the German troops are surrendering in large numbers. The German troops simply want to get out of the war. All right, August 8th through 11th, the Battle of Amiens. The Allies push the Germans back. The Germans are forced to retreat to the Hindenburg Line. The Kaiser now sees the handwriting on the wall and says, look, we have to come to some sort of understanding. Ludendorff says the war must be ended. The German morale is broken. And also the Allies begin to realize that they can win in 1918 if they keep up the pressure. October 14th, Germany seeks peace based on Wilson's 14 points. The United States says no, Kaiser's got to step down. All right, Kaiser steps down, Germany's declared a republic. Kaiser goes into exile in Holland where he will spend the rest of his life. All right, November 11th, the Germans sign an armistice ending the war. And that's what it is, it's an armistice. And that's celebrated even today, November 11th. It's known as Armistice Day. The casualties of the war, absolutely horrendous. Australia, 58,000 dead. Austria-Hungary, 922,000. Belgium, 102,000. Britain, 658,000. France, almost 1,400,000. Germany, 1,600,000. All right, here's another chart showing the casualties. Treaty of Versailles. This is negotiated among the Americans, the British, the French, and the Italians, although the Italians will later drop out. And the Germans aren't part of this. They just negotiated and they come up with their own position. Poland is created independently of Germany and Russia. It's a free state. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania become free states. Austria-Hungary, and Czechoslovakia are created from the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. Serbia and Bosnia are united, becomes Yugoslavia. Alsace-Lorraine is taken from Germany, given back to France. German Army, Navy are dissolved, and Germany is going to have to pay $33 billion in war damages and accept full responsibility for the war. Now, here you see a map. This is a map of Europe in 1914. This is a map of Europe after 1914. You see the great change. Now let me ask you a question.
Probably a little bit before that time.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Look at both of these maps. Which side won the First World War?
We did.
We did.
Yeah.
How many people think we won the First World War?
Well,
How many people think the British and the French won the First World War? The Germans won the First World War. Now, before you think I'm bonkers, I'm not bonkers. Germany remains intact. Germany loses some territory in the east to Prussia, to Poland. That's the Polish corridor. They lose Alsace-Lorraine, but Germany essentially remains united. German industry remains intact. The German population remains intact. The German army remains intact. So Germany is still the strongest economic power in Europe, strongest industrial power in Europe, and has potentially the strongest army in Europe.
The Second World War.
Yeah,
Part of it was
you see the Second World War on the rise. Now, the French have been devastated. The loss of manpower in France is such that I think the morale of the French army is busted. The British are absolutely disgusted. They don't want to get involved in a war. The Russians have pulled out. Where is the balancing power in Europe? Instead of a strong Russia, a strong Austria-Hungary, a strong France, you now have a weakened France. You have a bunch of small states in Central Europe, and you have a Russia that's not even part of the international state system. All right. After the war, the Treaty of Versailles, it irritates the Germans. They're angry over the treaty. They don't feel it's their fault. They don't like paying the $33 billion, and the German army marches back and tanked, and the German army says, we didn't lose the war. We were stabbed in the back by the politicians and stabbed in the back by the Jews, which is interesting. The German Jewish population was 600,000. The German population was 85 million. About 150,000 Jews served in the German army. About 25 or 30,000 lost their lives in the German army. But Germany didn't lose the war. Germany was stabbed in the back. That's what the Germans say. Now, the two powers that are persona non grata in the international state system are Germany, Weimar Germany, and Soviet Russia. What did Germany and Soviet Russia do in 1922? They signed an agreement. They signed a trade agreement between the two of them. The Rapallo, the Pact of Rapallo. Okay, so what's wrong with signing a trade agreement? But all agreements have secret clauses. One secret clause allows the German army to rearm and re-equip and train in Russia. So from 1922 to 1933, the German army is conducting exercises in Russia, developing tanks, developing airplanes, developing the technology that will be needed for the Second World War. It's only when Hitler comes into power that this cooperation is stopped. And if you want to know why Stalin has the purge trials in the 1930s, is that he doesn't trust his generals. They've been too friendly and too cooperative with the Germans. Of course, they were ordered to do this by Lenin and later Stalin, but that made no difference to Stalin. But I would maintain that it was Germany who won the war. As General Foch said in 1919 when the peace was signed, this is not a peace, this is an armistice that will last only 20 years and the war will start again. He was wrong. He missed it by a month. All right. Why don't you put the light on? I'm available for questions. I have talked longer than I had designed to talk, but we still have a half hour. All right. Yes, Germany won the war. Oh, I got to bring the...
I still say it's Rob.
Okay. Who wants to ask any questions or dispute anything that I've said? Yes.
To continue with what Harry said, during World War I, no enemy artillery shell or small arms fire or any kind of destruction was vested on Germany. There were a couple of Zeppelin raids which didn't amount to anything. So essentially when World War I ended, pictures that you see of Europe are Belgium and France with all the destruction. There was no destruction in Germany. The German army turned around, kept all their weapons, all their equipment. They went back, had a big parade down into the London, through the Brandenburg Gate, went back to the armories, put all their equipment back in the army, and went back to business like nothing had ever happened, except of course they'd had a lot of casualties.
I have a question.
Yes.
If they had to pay $33 million,
Billion.
in restitution, how did their economy come back?
Well, that's a good question. What they did was they inflated the economy, first of all. The German government didn't have the money to pay for the war, so they just printed marks. And then runaway inflation, by 1922 you needed something like 4 billion marks to buy a loaf of bread. You had to be paid twice a day. So you could go and you take a wheelbarrow full of money. But where did they get the money from? They borrowed the money from the United States. And they paid the money to Britain, France, who took the money that they owed to the United States and paid it back to the United States. So the Germans paid virtually nothing. All the money in war reparations came from the United States. It went to Britain and France, who paid the United States back. So the United States was left holding the bill for the war. Now, isn't that logical? Okay. Yes.
I noticed in the two maps that Romania about doubled in size.
Yes.
What's the explanation for that?
Romania came in on the side of the Allies, and the price for Romania coming in was Transylvania. Romania had lost Transylvania in one of the Balkan Wars, so yeah, Romania doubles in size. Now these countries, Romania and Hungary, for example, don't like each other. And during the Second World War, the Romanians and the Hungarians were allies of Hitler. They were at Stalingrad. And the Romanians and Hungarians were on the left wing of the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad. But Paulus, who was the German commander, had to put the Italians in between them. Because if he didn't put the Italians in between them, they would start shooting at each other. But they got Transylvania. That was their price. They all wanted prices. Italy wanted something. Greece wanted something. They all wanted territory. One thing you'll notice is the boundaries in Europe don't remain static. They change. Even today, now they're changed. There's nothing absolutely sacred about boundaries. That's why when you hear the story of the Middle East, you can't change boundaries. Of course you can change boundaries. They change all the time. They change throughout history. All right. So Romania gets Transylvania. Why anyone would want Transylvania, I don't know. Except they could get the whole of Dracula. All right. Who else? Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about the population levels of each country before and after the war?
Well, the population level of France is 45 million, England about 45 million, Germany 85 million, Austria-Hungary 45, 50 million, Russia 130 million. The one that's impacted the most is France. The French lose about 1.5 million killed, maybe 2 million seriously wounded. Now, you think about a population of 45 million, 22 million are male. Assuming you only enlist people in the Army that are 18 to 30, although they would go up much beyond that, you're talking about a pool of about 6 to 8 million people. You kill 1.5 million, 2 million wounded. That means that there are a lot of women who are going to lose their husbands. There are a lot of women who are not going to get married. This has a ripple effect throughout these societies. And it means that in the 1930s, when the Germans are rearming and building up their army, the French want to build up their army, but they simply do not have the pool of young men to draft in the army because they were not born during the years 1914 to 1918 or thereafter. So what the French have to do is to increase the term of service from 2 years to 3 years. The British were better able to handle it because a lot of those casualties came from India, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. So the impact was heavy on England, but not that heavy. The Russians suffered tremendously, but the Russians have a larger population. They bounce back. And then Austria-Hungary just disappears, and they're not going to be a factor. But the one that suffered the most, the power that suffered the most, was really France. Germany suffered, but 85 million. They came back very rapidly. And the German army was the finest in Europe during this period of time. It remained the finest throughout the 1920s and into the 1930s. And it was an experienced army. Someone else? Yes?
So what was the incentive for Germany wanting to go to start the Second World War? Because they fared fairly well. I mean, in a way better than some of the other countries. What was their incentive?
Revenge. Wanted to erase the state of Versailles. Also, Hitler wanted to create a greater German Reich out some people. are simply going to be murdered. He wants a greater German state, a powerful German state, a state that's the equal of Great Britain and the United States and Russia. This is the First World War and the Second World War, really flip sides of the same war. And that's a war in which Germany is attempting to establish its dominance in Europe. Yes?
You briefly talked about, at the very beginning, about the breakup of how the British and French redrew the lines in the Middle East. If the Ottoman Empire either had not joined the Germans and Austria, and had not fallen after the war, how do you see, what, speculative I realize, but...
Middle East would have been totally different. You wouldn't have had all the conflict you have in the Middle East today. Would the, the Ottoman Empire eventually disintegrated and various states come about? I don't know. It was a caliphate, and basically people were pretty much satisfied with the caliphate. ISIS is trying to reestablish the caliphate, but it was a pretty tranquil area before 1914. After 1918, 1919, it was anything but tranquil, and today it is an absolute cauldron of conflict. That was one of the real bad impacts of the war, was the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. Because the British went in, and the British nourished that Arab revolt. They said, you join us, you're going to get freedom. At the same time, they signed a treaty with France called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, in which they divided up the Arab lands and were going to make them all colonies. Guess what? They lied. Yes, Al.
Yeah, one more question.
One more question.
And if you have any others, you can come up and talk to me.
Any more questions?
A double question?
Couple questions. I'll give you a single answer.
The social movement, towards socialism and
Yes.
down of aristocracy and all that, was that a result of World War I, or was that happening anyway?
No, that was very prominent before the war. And one of the reasons why the Germans, for example, wanted to go to war was that they were afraid of the socialists. They wanted to rally the socialists. Jean Jaurès, who was a French socialist leader, preached that the working men of Europe should not participate in this war. And he held an international congress in Basel, Switzerland, in late July, trying to rally the socialists of Europe. But when he got back to Paris, he was assassinated. So socialism was very powerful, and it will remain powerful after the war, especially in France and especially in England. These countries will move to the left.